Welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about mapping out your financial plan, your wealth map. And we have an amazing woman here, Claudia. She is a top financial advisor. Say hi, Claudia.
Hi, everyone.
She's a top financial advisor, and she, like some of the other guests we've had, just an amazing professional. And she is here. We're actually going to do a series with her, digging into some of these topics that you need to understand about financial planning. So today she's going to do sort of an overview to help you get an idea of the picture and the moving parts and what this sort of financial planning looks like. And then over the next weeks, we're going to do a series. Did we decide on Thursdays?
Thursdays at 4:30, yep.
Thursdays at 4:30, so make sure you put that in your calendar over the next few weeks. We're going to have her come on and we're going to go in more depth into each of these different topics that you're going to need to understand to create your own wealth map. Okay? So, take it away, Claudia. And let me know when you want me to pop up the presentation.
You know, I think you can pop it up right now. And first, I will commend everyone for actually showing up for yourselves here today at 4:30 Pacific. And I know for some of you, it's much, much later in the day. But I commend you because finances is something, just like going to a dentist, for me, is something you can easily procrastinate on and just put off. And so the fact that even through this phase that we have right now with everybody at home, that you actually put this in your calendars and show up is huge. And for that, I commend you. And I thank you for your time, because I know all of our time is valuable. And with that, as Faith said, we're going to talk about wealth planning and why it is so important. Again, my name is Claudia Sawaf. Why it is so important to actually think with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey said so nicely in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And Faith has said that many times and encouraged you actually to have a vision. And with financial planning, you really want to start out with having that vision, that end in mind. And today I'd like to share with you just how you can go about sort of looking at that vision, but then putting the puzzle pieces together inside that vision. And I think when we do this sort of high level as a first session, and everybody understands the core, and for some of you, this may be a refresher, for some of you, this may be, okay, well, I learned one thing or two things. But if we are not all on the same level and same page on the strategy, on the overarching strategy, it's kind of hard to tackle the individual topics. What I found, and Faith, you can just go to the next slide. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief intro. I'm originally, so I'm going to take the guesswork out of this. I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, and moved to this country in 2000. So I've been here for 20 years now. And I changed careers right after I moved to this country. And so I've been in wealth management for nearly 2 decades now. And I've probably seen it all. And that's why I have so much conviction to say that you really have to start with the end in mind. And it doesn't matter where you're at. It is never too late. So the question I always get is, when do I start? When is a good time? Is it too early? Is it too late? And my answer is always, the time to start planning is now. And so for the past 2 decades, I've helped very successful clients in all areas of wealth management, in the areas of business planning, wealth preservation, protecting assets, retirement plan benefits, charitable planning, tax planning. And one thing I will add here, because the question I sometimes get is, how do we financial advisors vary? Like what's different from myself versus somebody down the road and the corner office to the left, right? And one thing I will say is, always, if you are looking to hire someone, hire a fiduciary advisor. Now, what does that mean in plain English? It means, if I wasn't already doing this for my own personal ethics and morals, to only do what's best and in the best interest of my clients, then I am also held to the highest levels of the law. So by law, any recommendation I make to my clients have to be in my client's best interest. And you would think this is common sense, but as Brendon Burchard says, common sense, not always common practice. Not everybody in the industry is held to the same standard, okay? So what that means is fees are very transparent. You always know what you pay for. There are no hidden fees. Nothing is free, because free usually means it's inflated fees somewhere else, because people usually don't run nonprofits. So one thing to know about this industry is look for a fiduciary advisor. I founded Sawaf Financial in 2014, have grown the practice and have grown to a point where I felt the need to partner with a larger firm, slightly larger firm. And I partnered with Mission Wealth last year. And Mission Wealth is also a fiduciary advisor. And we manage about 2.6 billion in assets. And I'm also the founder of Affluent. And just like you, Faith, I commend you for bringing people together and really educating around the topic of finance. It's become my mission, because there's only one of me working one-on-one with clients, to truly help women especially feel empowered, confident, and very competent also around the topic of money. And so Affluent is a movement of women, if you will, to take control of finances and their future. So think with the end in mind is also to say, and Faith has given quite a lot of assignments and nudges to say, you know, if you're really serious about this, it's one thing to attend the calls and listen and say, oh, that sounds great. And, oh, you know, Marco had some good stuff to say, and Adiel coming on next week, that sounds interesting. But until you know what your personal vision is, right? What is that number? What does financial independence mean to you? And I can tell you, everybody's not only definition, but everybody's number, everybody's values, their goals, their timelines, everybody's different. Okay, I have clients that became financially independent at the age of 52. I have others that physicians categorically do not want to retire, so they're still typically reading EKGs at the age of 85. So, you know, there is no right or wrong. There's no, oh, I have to be ready by this point. I think once you know what that end result looks like, and this is another one of Stephen Covey's quote, is everything is created twice, right? So once you create a vision mentally, right, then now you have the physical creation follows that. But if we're not clear in our own minds of, you know, here I am, and Khaled, you run a successful company in New York. Looking at your Facebook picture, you look very young, right? You might say, hey, you know, I'm doing really well, and so by the age of 50, I'm done. Right? I'm going to take this business to a certain point, maybe pass it on to the kids, or maybe sell it. But we have to be really clear on what we want to achieve, right? And then we can start to work and coordinate everything inside that strategy. And so, Faith, what you do is really incredible, because you help people find clarity. And I feel in a Facebook group, there's also a bit of accountability there. There's these little nudges from Faith. Have you done your budget? Have you followed up on certain strategies? The PPP was a good example, right? Many of you took advantage of the program, did the work, and actually essentially reaped the benefits. Faith provides you with experts, not only in wealth management, but then also in real estate and in other areas. So there are so many tools that are coming your way that if you're serious about this, I think it's all in your power now to say, to make a decision, draw the line in the sand and say, you know what, from now on, I'm going to know my number, meaning how much do I have to have aside in a so-called nest egg or an asset base that can fund my lifestyle for the rest of my life, and then figure out what that age needs to be. And then what my goal for today is really share with you, okay, so now you know that goal, how are you going to get there? Okay, so with the time allotted, we're not going to be able to go into products and programs and specifics, but the analogy that Faith and I talked about earlier today was essentially think about you build your home and you hire an architect to come up with the blueprint. Okay, so that blueprint is essentially connecting rooms to one another. You're not just going to go ahead and say, oh yeah, I'm going to put a room over there that's going to look nice. And then I'm going to put another room over here. But then if we don't connect it with the electric and the pipes, it's not going to work, right? And so from my experience, I can tell you that a lot of clients come to me with rooms everywhere. And then they're at that age to say, what does all that mean? They've been sold products, they've been just buying things on their own, and now it's this hodgepodge, right? And then they're like, I want to retire, but no idea what all this is. And so we've come in many times to make sense of everything and then kind of put the puzzle pieces together. So the more you can be organized from the get-go, the easier it's going to be when you reach that number as well.
Awesome. Yes. So let's look a little bit more about how do we design this blueprint that we're talking about. Okay.
Sounds good. And by the way, as we dive into this, if you have questions, feel free to post those in the chat box, and I am happy to sort of go along with questions as we go through these slides. So really high level overview. And here's the thing, you probably have all seen this. Sometimes we know what we need to do, but whether or not we actually execute on it is a different story. And so my philosophy has always been keep it simple, right? This entire financial world is extremely complex. And I will say my industry has not done a really good job helping clients, helping people just like all of you to really understand the different strategies, build this blueprint, what should be underneath, what types of rooms do I want, right? And so I always start out with just very simple strategies, and then underneath that, we'll dig deeper, as Faith said, and in the following 4 or 5 weeks, we'll take deep dives into each of these areas. But essentially, it starts out with evaluating your needs. Faith, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I just wanted to say, like, sometimes, like, even me, when I look at this diagram, I'm like, oh crap. If you have that oh crap thing, right? Like it says taxes, investment vehicles, timers, legacy, shit, what am I supposed to do, right? So don't worry about that, because the whole point of what I'm doing with this group is to say, how do we figure out what's the fastest, simplest way to figure out exactly what goes in each of those little pieces, and to say this is where you can go. If you know it, here, go here, right? So that's really where I want us to get to, not just to be able to, understand, like, what do we plug in for your plan, but also to think about, also to kind of have an idea of, these are your options of where you can go and just open an account, get started, walk you through that simple process of doing that. So today, you need to kind of look at the whole picture a little bit to see the vision. And, you got to build the framework, and then we can dig in and see each of the different rooms in the house, but you need to kind of see what it looks like on the house level. Okay. So don't let this initial, even though it's a colorful slide, it can still initially look a little scary. I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible as we move forward.
Really, really good point. Really good point. And I think the point that I would like to make here is, we don't just, these are steps that you want to look into as an entire strategy, right? So we don't want to go ahead and say, oh, should I buy this product now, or should I buy this, or should I try to time the market, right? It's once you know your entire strategy, it becomes much more clear whether or not a certain strategy or product is going to fit into your personalized plan, if that makes sense. So you always start out with know where you are, so that level of awareness of what is my starting point. And sometimes it is a little tedious. Nobody likes to hear the word budget, right? Me included, right? People always look at me and say, oh, you must be immune to all this because that's what you do for a living, right? But trust me, if you ask my husband or my kids, budget is sort of, but I've learned to make friends with the word budget, because you can actually create a very meaningful lifestyle spending report, if that sounds a little better than the word budget, by the way, paradigm shift. But you can create something meaningful where you say, you know, let me analyze every single line item, because then I'm going to be aware. And then I also probably see subscriptions and memberships and things that mean absolutely nothing to me. And then I have to think, okay, but here's my vision. So if I can scratch out all the stuff that means absolutely nothing to me, right? And I just forgot about it because it's a subscription through iTunes and it's just there, right? That's an example. And then I can add something in that's much more meaningful: a date night, a gift for my kids, or a trip, right? So you can create. Just think about when you take control, it's extremely empowering. Okay, and then once you know where you are, your starting point, then you can start mapping out where you want to go. Then you start defining strategies, you start choosing, okay, which products, because at some point you have to think, okay, how am I going to fund the strategies? And there are products involved, and we'll go into that. And no plan is going to last forever, right? There's going to be changes. There are bumps on the road. There are stock markets that change, goals can change, your vision could change, right? So over time, you always want to evaluate, adapt. It's like your 6-month cleaning at the dentist, right? I always make that analogy because for some reason I have a dentist phobia. So sometimes people tell me financial planning feels like that too, but it shouldn't. It's actually quite fun if you approach it the right way. And then we'll talk about achieving your goals. All right. Yeah, next slide.
As to the fun, that's part of what I want to do here. Is I want to come up with ways that we can make this feel fun.
Right. So the use of technology actually should help a lot. Years ago, I sent people off with a little notebook and I said, okay, every time you go out and spend something, just write it down, which is also, you know what, there's nothing wrong with that. If you do not like technology and you don't want to add a bunch of, connect your bank accounts and have this type of work, it works just as well if you track your spending in a notebook, just saying. But there is technology out there that's extremely helpful. I personally, in my family, we use Mint. So essentially you link up your bank accounts, your credit cards. What I like about Mint is you also put in all your expenses for your house. It gives, and then you can set a budget side by side. So what it allows you to do is actually compare, okay, well, if I budgeted, let's say $700 for eating out, which maybe not a great example right now because none of us is eating out right now, but 3 months ago, I am very bad at eating out instead of cooking at home. So when you set this budget and then Mint shows you, okay, well, you're actually about $200 over each month, right? Or $100. It also alerts you that you're reaching this sort of end mark at the budget, right? So that's, for me, it's an easy to use system. It's banking secure. You will get ads, unfortunately. So just scratch those out. Do not answer the ads. But that's a good software to use. Other apps that I've recently researched and come across, don't ask me if they call themselves YNAB or YNAB. For those of you who have heard that budgeting software, please let me know how they want to be called. But what they do is they do zero-based budgeting. So they're essentially saying every dollar should have a place to go. There's something, and every dollar is the same, and it's actually the daughter of Dave Ramsey who started Every Dollar. And what it says is you should pay yourself first. So you allocate your savings, and then you allocate your expenses, and you budget everything that's fun to do, that's necessary. And then at the end, you should come out at zero. Okay. So those are really good apps. There are free versions and there are upgraded versions if you want some more bells and whistles. There's Clarity Money. That's probably useful if you're like us, where sometimes you forget you had an iPhone subscription and you forgot to cancel it. It will actually alert you. And it also includes credit monitoring, although some credit cards do that too. And then there's Good Budget. So we're recording this and you will have this slide as well. But just look at these softwares, and if you like technology, use it to your advantage and really start analyzing it. I always say for a good month, spend as you usually do, and then analyze that budget. And then critically look at every line item. And what I did is kind of the Marie Kondo version of budgeting, right? But I would say, does this really bring me joy, right? And if it doesn't, why are you paying for it? And then scratch it out and then think about what else can you do with this allocated amount that works towards your long-term vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And one thing, so I recently was reviewing this thing, and it was talking about how if you take $100, you put it into something at an 8% interest over 20 years, it's going to be worth 5 times that much. So another way to think about it when you're purchasing a product is like, do I really need this waffle maker for $50? Is it actually worth $250 to me in, future money? So if you say, yeah, it really is, like, the joy of this really is worth $250 to me, then fine, go ahead and buy it. But if you're like, yeah, no, really it's not, then think about taking that money and putting it into your investments instead. So that's another little way to kind of bring down home just that, times it by 5 and say, is it really worth it to me?
That's a really good point. And I think another point that I'd like to make is, budgeting isn't just for, oh, I'm starting out and now I need a budget. I have some of my highest net worth clients that love looking at their lifestyle spending, because whatever it is that they do not have joy spending money on, they would donate, right? So if you are charitably inclined, if you have some organizations you have a big heart for, right? In my family, we do a lot of volunteering, and we have that discussion too. It's like, do we really need it? Like, how many families could we feed with this money, right? So don't think about budgeting as, what is she talking about? I'm already here. I've attained this level of success. I think it's really something where it's an empowering exercise to do and really analyze what's giving you satisfaction, what's meaningful to you and what's not, and how else could you use those dollars? Absolutely. So once you know where you stand, there should always be discretionary dollars, right? So you bring in X amount, whether that's from your business, from a job, from passive investments, but you have a certain income or your resources. And after you deduct essentially your fixed expenses, your discretionary expenses, you end up with discretionary savings. And I can tell you, human nature, if those are not planned for, we probably find 20 different ways to spend the money, right? I'm included in that. Amazon has been very happy with our ordering track record lately. I have 2 teenage daughters at home and we're doing extremely well. If you own Amazon stocks, you can thank our family for contributing to their profit line. So in other words, so now you know, okay, I have this discretionary savings. Where am I gonna place it and how, right? I have various goals, and many times we all have competing goals, right? We do want to retire at one point, and if you don't want to call it retirement, it just means I want to be financially independent, where I have an income stream and I can opt to work, but I don't have to. And of whatever age that is. But once I know that, right, then I'm going to have to say, well, how am I going to get there? But then there may be other goals. There may be travel. There may be fun things before I'm financially independent. There could be education goals. And so to keep this really easy, what we thought is to lay this out is essentially think about this as different buckets. And short term, we want to take a lot less risk, and we have to consider taxes, right? We'll talk about taxes and how we can defer and deduct and do all the fun stuff so we don't end up paying too much of our hard-earned dollars in taxes. But when we have short-term money, we probably go to things like cash. I know it's not paying us anything, but everybody needs an emergency savings account. If you have upcoming purchases within the next year, you really don't want to take any risk. And if you want to start a business in the next 12 to 18 months, right? There's really no investment that's going to give you the guaranteed quick buck to say, I'm going to double this money within a year. I think whenever you're being promised that, you have to be a little cautious. So again, think about municipal bonds. They tend to be tax-free, definitely on a federal level. And if you purchase municipal bonds on the state level, if you live in a state that also has state tax, then you probably want to purchase municipal bonds in the state you live in. And then the gains, the income, that's all tax-free. Or you look at short-term fixed income, just anything that's giving you more than cash, but we're not expecting a double-digit winning return either, right? So you take a little less risk also because when that time comes where you need the funds, let's say pre-corona, you had $100,000 and you knew in July you needed to use this 100,000 for a specific goal. Had you invested that in the stock market, right, you may not have 100,000 right now. So you really, the shorter term time frame you have, the less risk you want to take. Once you step up into those 3-5 years and beyond, and certainly also if you're thinking about retiring or being financially independent before the age of 59 and a half, we still have to consider taxes. As you know, most retirement accounts have this 59 and a half rule attached, which I'll talk in a minute about. But now you can say, well, if I have a 10-year goal, then I can certainly take more risk, and then I can have a balanced portfolio. Maybe I'll have some real estate. Maybe I'll, depending on how much money you have to invest, we'd look at some private equity investments, alternative investments. But just think now you can step up the risk level, but you still have to be quite tax conscious. Okay. And then any long-term goal, this is where you're going to get the most bang for the buck, because now you're going to have tax deductions, which help you reduce your tax burden right now. So if you own a business and you do not have a retirement fund set up, right? Even if you think retirement funds are boring, I can't access them until I'm 59 and a half. I'm going to say this with a lot of conviction now. If you don't have a retirement plan, you are definitely paying too much in taxes. Okay. So long term, you're still going to need other assets if you're going to be financially independent before the age of 60. But long term, now we have to really look at what are all the great tools the government allows you to have that give you tax deferral, tax deductions, and potentially some that give you some tax-free income later on. And then we get more creative. We can take more risk. I'm not talking speculating. I'm just saying we're going to go for more growth. You're certainly going to go for more of those long-term double-digit returns. You may have some real estate investments, as Marco taught us, as Adiel is going to teach us this week, and maybe creating some personal pensions. So later on, you have something that's going to come in that's a fixed type income. And so not everything you have is subject to stock market volatility. Does anyone have any questions at this point or comments? I'm sure this is not new to you, but I feel like this is a good refresher to know sort of the approach of where do we place money. And typically you probably have money in all these buckets because we all have goals that have different time frames.
Or we have money in none of these buckets yet, and it's just sitting in a bank account, which is true for many of us. Absolutely. That's why we're going to create the map for the buckets. Yep. So one thing to think about, people, like when she's talking about, like if you own your own business, you're definitely paying much in taxes. You may think, well, you know, this is just an example of what having this type of retirement account can do for you if you have your own business. Because if you could put money into there and you can sit down with like a calculator and figure out basically, okay, my income, my taxable income puts me at a certain tax bracket, right? Like let's say your taxable income puts you in the 24% tax bracket. Well, maybe you're not that far over that tax bracket income. You can grab some of that money, stick it into a retirement account, and all of a sudden your entire tax bracket goes down and all of your income is taxed at a lower tax percentage. So that's some of the cool stuff you want to be doing with this type of knowledge once you learn to understand it. Okay, let's go.
Really good point. So in this financial planning scenario, right, we started out assessing where you're at, what are your resources, and then we said, okay, so now what are the different buckets, right? Short term, intermediate, long term. And then you start looking at what are some of the investment vehicles you have available to you, right? So once, and there is kind of a sequence to that, because what I find is, again, those clients that came to me fast forward and now they have all these different buckets and they're not really making any sense, right? There was no rhyme or reason. There was more or less a very disjointed, oh, let's do this now because somebody said it was a good idea, right? So when you think about it more, if once you know, okay, I have these 3 different timelines, right? Then you can start saying, okay, how do I fund these timelines? And then I have to say, and Khaled, you mentioned that earlier, right? You said I'm paying way too much in taxes, right? Then you say, okay, well, what's my objective here, right? I do need to save for beyond 60, right? Because life expectancy tends to get longer as we, as time goes by, medical research. Now we're looking at life expectancy of about 90 for a healthy person. So there's a lot of time to be financially independent from the age of 50 to 90, 95, right? So
And I'm looking to go till 140, so.
Good for you. So then we better make sure there are a lot of buckets there that fund your long-term retirement, Faith. But then I also say, if I know I need some long-term money, but I also want some short-term immediate tax benefits, and you do have a business, then you say, well, how am I going to be able to deduct more money from my top line? And retirement plans, and especially business owners, and I've had my own business for over 6 years, and I work with a lot of medical practices, small businesses, medium-sized businesses. There is a lot that you can do when you have self-employed income. So for those of you that own businesses, you're in a very, very advantageous position in this country. And we will go in one of the future sessions and take a deep dive into what are all these different retirement vehicles and which business can do what and how much can you set aside. But just know, if you own a business, you can have your own 401k plan, depending on how many employees you have. If you don't have employees, maybe you want a SEP IRA. But then what if you can fund more than, let's just round it down or up, more than 60,000 a year, then a SEP may not be enough. Well, then there might be defined benefit cash balance plan. So there are so many different retirement vehicles that you are able to use. And I full well understand, when you own a business, the first income we have is to only reinvest back in the business, right? Why? Because we trust ourselves. We know our human capital. But then when the tax return time comes around and we pay this extraordinary large tax amount, right, then we have to think, okay, maybe I need to carve out some of the business revenues to not reinvest back in the business, but actually carve those out to set aside for yourself for later, which, by the way, is a nice way of diversifying too, because now you're not just investing in the business, you're also investing into your own retirement. So it kind of serves multiple purposes, if you will.
And you're investing into other people's business smarts too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is something I want to talk to you, I want to say and be very, very clear on. The bulk of the tax code. So people are like, oh, I don't want to get in trouble with the IRS and this and that and the other. No, you don't. And, as a lawyer and a financial advisor, we cannot and will not tell you something, we absolutely don't want anybody getting in trouble with the IRS. So that's not an issue. But the truth is that the bulk of the code, the bulk of the tax code is written to help you save on taxes. if they wanted to just do straight, easy, simple tax plan, they'd make it a flat tax and we'd all have a, way easier time. But the way most of the tax code is written to give you incentives to do different things where they're going to give you deductions. So they want you to take those incentives. They want you to save on taxes by doing these different types of actions, right? The government really wants people to save for retirement so that those people are not a burden on the system later on. And so it's incentivizing you, it's giving you the tax deduction to help people to do that. So we don't realize that most of the tax code is written to help us save on taxes. We just need to understand how to use it in order to do so.
That's a really good point. And I think sometimes I hear too, Faith, that, well, if I could have done something, how come my CPA didn't tell me? And I will tell you this, I work and collaborate with a lot of CPAs, and I just absolutely am in awe of their knowledge of the tax code. But CPAs are typically not looking to say, well, how else can you save? They tend to take all your information, crunch the numbers, and then give you the outcome, if you will. So this requires a little bit of a team effort to say, what else can we do? And then we'll have the CPA run the analysis. So many times I'm being asked that, so how come I don't already have a defined benefit plan? Well, it's not every CPA just thinks about recommending, and that's clearly, that's also not their job. And they're not trained on these plans. They're trained on how to deduct it from your return if you have one of those plans. And I say this with all the respect to my CPA colleagues in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the truth is, there's different levels of quality, right? There's good lawyers and there's poor lawyers, and there's good CPAs and there's poor CPAs. And, a lot of people are really just bookkeepers. You give them the information, they crunch the numbers, and they hand you the result. But they're not trained to think strategically, right? They're not like a CFO is somebody who's supposed to think strategically. They look at all the moving pieces and they say, how can we make it better here? How can we move this here? What's your real end goal? And shift things around. Most CPAs, they don't see that as their role. Maybe they didn't study that. Maybe they just studied the basic CPA handbook. They didn't study the tax strategy handbook, okay? So you need to understand that. And what we're going to talk about here is helping you to understand what those strategies are. So you know what to ask for, you know what questions to ask, you know how to think about your own structure and system to get you the best returns that you can.
Really good point. And I think also in a CPA's defense, think about when we give a CPA all of our tax documents. It's typically at the end of the year or sometime before April 15. A lot of these strategies have deadlines in September of the same year. So by the time the CPA gets all of your documents, it's actually too late. So one thing I will just put as a sort of little plug in your minds as business owners is you always want to start tax planning in the summer and not on April 15.
Yeah, so we're in good timing here, right?
Okay, so in all this stay-at-home time now, that's a good time to start doing some tax planning and figuring this whole thing out. So we'll talk a lot about these retirement plans in a lot more detail. And also, if you don't own a business, there are still retirement plans and how they work, and we'll dive deep on that. And then,
yeah, that's a really good point, Claudia. I do want to pinpoint that. So, one of my thought processes in setting up this group and how I'm timing what the content and material we're going through is understanding that. So if you don't have something set up, it's too late for 2019. So sorry. But we're going to learn about all this stuff this year so that we can set up something this year before the end of the year, and you can, use it, put money in there from the whole year period, right? So that's why we're doing this now, why we're doing it kind of as a whole year project, so that we learn about this stuff over the next couple months and we're able to set it up before we get close to the deadline at the end of the year.
Really good point. Now, other programs that provide tax advantages, for those of you that have kids, you know, when you look at all these programs, right, 529 is just a tax code, but essentially it means if you have younger children and you want to make sure there's money set aside for their college education and you want to save on taxes, just know something like a college education savings account, 529 plan, it lets you put money in after tax, but then the funds are tax deferred, they come out tax free to be used for college education and any eligible expense surrounding college. And then Roth IRAs. So there are a lot of things we can talk about some more, but there are programs where you're not only thinking, okay, I need to accumulate for a specific goal, but then you say, which of these goals allow me to also take advantage of the tax code? Okay. And with that, I think also think about diversification. You may have a favorite thing, which for business owners is typically the business. As you were saying, Faith, right? Why not invest in other businesses too that have proven that they know what they're doing and they're doing a great job? So certainly diversifying between stock markets, private equity, alternatives, real estate investments. And one thing I will say is, I would always say, if you come across a deal and it's highly speculative, always, I mean, don't shy away from it. I'm more of the, I'm very risk conscious, if that makes sense. Some people are just extremely risk happy. But if that's the case, if you know it's speculative, just think about it. If I lost it all, am I okay with that? If I lost it all, am I still going to be financially independent at the age of 50 or 45 or 75, right? Whatever your age that you have set out to do. So keep it on the lower percentage and just know, be okay with making decisions. Look, we all make good and bad decisions, and you just have to be prudent with any of where you allocate your funds to and say, well, I'm not going to risk my whole retirement 401k for something where my friend has this great startup and wants me to self-direct now, right?
Yeah, and the other thing to think about that, so I like to think about it, and we'll talk more about like percentages of stuff. So, you know, something you call your play money, right? That's what I would call it. I would kind of call it play money. Like, okay, you know, this is maybe 5% or, you know, some smaller 1% or whatever of my total income or total portfolio, and I can afford to sort of play with this, like, you know, whether it's doing some trading on the stock market, or it's in Bitcoin, or, you know, there's things that are quite speculative, right, that unless you have huge base of knowledge, you might not be very good at judging yet, but you can use some money to kind of make some plays and learn about stuff in small amounts of money. So that can be fun to do, but, you know, you want to keep it at a very low percentage of your total portfolio. The other point I want to make to what Claudia just said about investing in your business, a lot of times we like to invest in our business, but think about it. The whole point of this is that you don't want to have to be running the business anymore, right? If you keep investing everything in that business, you're presupposing that you're going to keep running that business. The idea is to start putting money into things that will give you passive money, so that if you decide, hey, I'm tired, I'm done running the business, you've got a stream of income coming from this other stuff that's not due to your personal effort. That's where we want to be going. All right.
Sounds great. And by the way, the business can very well be part of your overall strategy. And if we know your business is fairly mature, and as the slide says, business planning, right? And we have a valuation, and we say, you know, if you already have people interested, and maybe in 2 years, you're going to get X amount for that business, that will become one bucket in this overall strategy, right? And that's typically the goal too, right? When we start a business, the goal is to, at some point, grow it to a point where you have prospective buyers, and then that becomes part of that income. But it is, just keep in mind, it's one bucket. It shouldn't be all of it in this one bucket. So financial planning or wealth management also comes with managing risk. And so think about it this way. You could be spending all your time working really hard, using your intellect, having businesses or doing really well in a career, well, one thing is if we don't manage taxes, we may be paying too much of our hard-earned income. If we don't manage risk in a sense of, you have to insure what you can't afford to lose. And we're usually very good to insure things like our home, our cars, because by law we have to. But then there are other things where we just kind of feel very invincible. And I'm just going to say we all don't have a crystal ball of what's going to happen. And so you have to dedicate some dollars to basic risk management strategies, whether that's your life, if you have loved ones that depend on you being able to get up every morning and open the doors of your business and bring income in. Disability, same thing. If you can't be there to open the doors, there isn't a loss of income. Health, that's a no-brainer. I know it's expensive. I know it's a pain, but just think of which pain is worse, right? Is it the paying the premiums, or is it you end up in an emergency room, something serious, and you don't have insurance? So that can wipe people out. And so managing risk is really important. Just like when you have a business, you have business insurances, you have liability insurances, umbrella coverages, and we can do an entire topic with a couple of very trusted insurance people and dive into that deeper. But just make sure you're not neglecting that in your overall plan. But going back,
there's something I want to tell you about this. So since I've been learning about this topic of insurance and studying about it, I have been pleasantly surprised to discover that you can actually use some of these insurance products to do a whole range of other stuff. So there's different types of vehicles that, say, if you're a business owner, where you can put money into those vehicles and get a tax deduction on them and then spend that on your premiums. So the actual amount of your premiums or your healthcare goes down considerably. There's different types of insurance products which after say 10 years or 15 years can start paying you a monthly income. So there's all kinds of very interesting stuff that I had no idea existed of other ways that you can use these products where it's not just I pay, and then see if something happens, right? Yeah. There's been a lot of different structuring involved with this stuff. So they can end up being a source of income for you even. So yeah, we're going to talk more about that, and that makes it a lot more exciting, I think.
Thanks for saying that. And I will just remind you, always make sure it fits into your overall strategy, right? There is no one fits all product. And so I always strongly advise, if you're being sold on a product in and of itself without looking at how does it fit in with your overall plan, I'd be very cautious, and always make sure everything is aligned, right? Because what may be an amazing product for you, Faith, may not be at all the right one for me. We all have different resources, different goals. So just know, don't fall into a product salesperson's hands. Really think about it. Okay, if I choose to purchase this product, how does it fit in with the overall strategy? Which puzzle piece is it, if that makes sense? And then just going back to tax planning, another thing, and we'll have an entire session on that, but just to sort of start the thought process on this, we do something in our firm, and I've done this for a long time, which is called asset locating. And so the way you want to think about strategies, whether that's purchasing real estate or purchasing any type of investment within your overarching strategy, where should you be placing this asset? Okay, as an example, there's an alternative investment that drives income to our clients' portfolios, and without going into details, it's an attractive income, it's a great alternative, nice diversification to any other stock and bond market investments. But what we do know about this investment is that the income is considered ordinary income. So then I have to think, okay, well, I like this added income in my net worth, but where should I be placing this? Well, ideally, we're going to place this in one of your retirement accounts, because then it does not add to your other ordinary income, and therefore it's not going to bump you up into the next higher tax bracket, right? On the flip side, if you had a chance to purchase real estate, let me give you a different example. If you said, you know what, I want to invest in solar, and there are alternative vehicles where you can be a partner in a solar farm, and essentially you now get the income from the electricity that's being sold to utility companies. Long story short, all of that income is tax-free. Why? Because it gets tax credit from the government. It is alternative energy. It happens to be good for our environment, right? Now that's an investment vehicle that I would rather hold in one of those other buckets, right, that are maybe intermediate term, where I get that income tax free. I don't have to put a tax wrapper in the form of a retirement account around that. So we always want to think with taxes, okay, what can give us a tax deduction, which is typically retirement vehicles? What can tax defer? That could be retirement accounts, that could be annuities. If I don't want to pay the tax on each and every year's growth and get a 1099, right, then I want to use investment vehicles that tax defer. Or I have other types of investments, and then I'm like, okay, which one is already tax favorable? I don't need to tax wrap it.
Yeah, if this sounds confusing, which it does, don't worry. I plan to come up with some very nice visuals and cartoons and various things like that, which will show you a little more clearly exactly what she's talking about. So just hear it right now. Just kind of let that stuff start sinking into your brain and into your head. But I will show you like visually what this looks like and what she's talking about, so that you can understand what we mean. But basically what she's saying is, when you put money into this plot right over here, you can only access it after a certain age. And if you put it over here, so let's say for me, I want to be done with making money by the time I'm 50. Okay. So I need to have assets and investments over here that I can live off of, that are producing income for me, that are not hidden behind the wall of the tax retirement vehicle, which I can only access after I'm 60. See? So this is kind of a little bit what we're talking about, but don't worry about it if you don't fully understand it yet. No problem. I'm gonna make it simpler with pictures later.
Yeah, and we're planting seeds, right? So for me, it's always, you hear it once, maybe some of it sinks in, but then you hear it again, you're like, oh, now I know, that's what we were talking about, yeah. Right? Or if all it does is the next time you have an opportunity to invest, you think, okay, does it fit in my strategy? How is it being taxed? Where would it make most sense? That's really the critical thought process you would have here. So really good point. This all can get really confusing, but there is a method to the madness. All right, and then again, choosing the right product. There is no thing as one fits all. There is no thing that's free. Just always keep that in mind. Always ask who is promoting. If I had someone recommending a restaurant to me, I would want to make sure that that person doesn't get paid a commission from only one Italian restaurant in all of Santa Monica or in all of Newport Beach. I would want to know that that person actually has tried lots of different restaurants, has done their research, and is very unbiased and independent in offering you this product. Okay, so don't be afraid of asking a lot of questions, and then make sure the product fits into the strategy. I've said that before, so that's really a theme you always want to think about. Know the fine print, okay? And it's okay to ask, you know, also, what's my plan B? What if I, in a year from now, don't like this product? Make sure there's no weird kind of penalties involved. And if it's worth it, then just know what those are. And I would also say, don't chase performance. Okay, if something sounds too good to be true, I can tell you from my 20 years experience in this industry, it probably is. Okay? But we'll go into more specifics there as well. So again, evaluating, it's really important. You know, so many times people start a plan. Maybe you've done your living trust as an example, right? Estate planning was one of our themes in risk management. Everybody needs to make sure you have those documents, the directives and trust documents, right? But if you don't evaluate on an ongoing basis, life happens, things change, your goals may change. So you really want to make sure that throughout, I'm going to say every once a year is really a minimum that you want to go ahead and review your plan, review performance, right? Things in real estate can change. We go through market cycles. Make sure that everything you own still makes sense, whether that's in the investment realm, in the insurance world, whether that's your living trust, whether that's any legal plans. Just review, look at your mile markers. And the other thing that's actually nice about evaluating process and progress is to say, you know, how much closer am I this year to my goal than I was last year? So there's something very encouraging by seeing that everything you plant the seeds and you put into place is actually growing for you, right? It's not just a piece of paper document. Okay, great, I've put this in place and now it's meaningless, right? So make sure you stay engaged, you stay involved. If you have someone you work with, ask questions every single year and know what the progress is in the plan. And if your vision has changed, there's nothing wrong with that, right? We see this all the time. You know, maybe you had this business in mind, but now you're doing a different one. Financial plans can be modeled in every which way, but make sure when you make a good decision, you're clear and it makes sense to you and you've looked at the models, how it's going to impact your future.
Yeah. And, you know, for those of us that are kind of starting out, our plans don't have to be super complicated.
No.
We can have just, this is a bucket here, we put some in, this is a bucket here, this is like one real estate investment we put some money into, right? And it can be fairly simple. It's just, and there can be a simple way to access each of those points.
Mm-hmm.
Get started with putting stuff into there. So it's not, you know, and then going and looking at those and being like, hey, I made that much in this account this year. Great, right? And then you can think about, do I need to put more in to hit my goal? Or am I doing really well? Or am I going to hit my goal faster than I thought, right? So it's a great thing to get involved with understanding.
Yeah, and I think there's a saying which I always take to heart. It's where your thoughts go, your energy flows. So I know this is a little out there, has nothing to do with financial planning, but it really fits well with financial planning, because if you have your vision mapped out, right, and you know where you're going, that's where the energy flows. And then each and every year when you check progress or when something changes, you may actually want to check progress more often or change the plan. If a major life change happens, that's a good time to start looking at maybe making some adjustments. But when you use this and when you have this top of mind, right, when you have your budgeting software or your notebook, it doesn't matter. Whatever works for you is a step in the right direction, right? When you keep all this top of mind and you don't, I feel like money comes with a lot of baggage too, right? Just don't make yourself feel bad about anything, right? Nobody's perfect. Just be aware, fix it, have your strategy mapped out. And then you start getting closer to goal achievement, right? And this, are we there yet, right? That's a good question to ask, right? It should be motivating to say, okay, well, let me check how much closer am I to maybe Faith, you know, in 3 years from now, you review your plan, you say, well, there's nothing wrong with being financially independent at the age of 45 and not 50, right? So that's the fun part, but that takes engagement and involvement. So it's not a one-off thing. And it's just also being interested in this stuff.
Yeah. So I want to make one point. Someone had a question about what do you mean by don't chase performance? Okay. So for us and what we talk about in this group, and like I said, like I have a minimum of 8% because I can make money on basically liquid cash at 8% interest. I know how to do that. So I kind of am putting that as a minimum for myself. But there are some other products like, say, municipal bonds that give off a lower amount, but they're tax free. See? So there's lots of ways. We do want to absolutely be focused on the performance of a product and make sure that it's performing at least to the extent that we are expecting. We want to be comparing different products. Mm-hmm. We're definitely going to do all of that. But maybe you can explain a little bit more about what you mean by don't just chase performance.
So you bring up a good point, right? Of course, we all want to do really well, because the more our assets grow, right, the quicker we get to our goals. There's no doubt. But I need to have the education to know that if somebody came around to me, Faith, and said, hey, I have the same type of strategy that Faith describes, but mine is going to do 16%, then a trigger needs to go off in your mind to say, is that realistic? Right? So there are, unfortunately, not just this industry, financial industry, it's in real estate, it's all kinds of industries. There's over-promising strategies, right? And I think you really want to hear exactly how they're going to get to what they're promising, right? Look at track records and see how realistic that is. Okay.
Yeah. So like basically what you're saying, like if someone's coming to you and saying, okay, great, you're making basically a guaranteed 10%, but you could make 30% with this, or what, then a light should go off in your head and you should be like, is it like, is that a consistent 30%? Will I make that in any type of market, right? So the stuff I want to look at for me is I want to know that this is reasonably secure and that has a track record over time. I'd rather be making that 10% every year rather than, this could make 30% or you could lose it all, right? So think about that's what we mean by don't just chase performance, because they'll overpromise, but they underrepresent the risk involved, and that's a really big issue. So that's what we're talking about.
Good point. And you can't expect the same performance in every single bucket that you're saving for. Short term, very different objective, very different product line out there that fits this sort of short term, less risk type scenario. And that's what I mean by that.
Yeah. And typically less risky is you make a lower percentage on it. More risky
means you need to access the money sooner. So sometimes you don't have a choice.
Long term you can often make a higher percentage on it. So that's kind of how to think about that scale a little bit.
Really good point.
But even for the long term, so-called higher risk products, we want to make sure that those are pretty secure as well.
Exactly.
With at least a minimum.
Exactly. And we'll talk about this some more when we do a deep dive into investment strategies. There's a little bit more that goes to the don't chase performance. So our next steps, we do realize that none of you may have heard it all before. But again, I think it's good for us to kind of just set the intention and refocus on, what's important with being successful financially long-term. It is typically when you have a well thought out strategy that fits your vision. Okay, so we wanted to make sure everybody's on the same playing field, same level. And from there, we can start building and take deep dives into what is a financial plan? What could that look like? What sort of goals could I be modeling? And how do I know when I'm going to be financially independent, right? What is that number that I need to shoot for? So I thought we Faith and I discussed this, and we can do sort of a live demo, model out a few different scenarios. And so the wheels might start turning to say, maybe that's something I should be doing. So I have a really clear roadmap on where I want to go. And then we'll go into the various different retirement plan strategies, but also how do you get started, right? Maybe you do need a financial plan and maybe you don't. There are ways where you can go to trusted sources and open a retirement plan and figure out with your CPA or from do your own taxes, right? which plan might fit for you. So we'll dive into that as well. Our goal is to give you takeaways too, not just, oh, here's great information. We really want to give you the how-to. And if you feel you can do this by yourself, great. And if not, we want to give you some other sources as well.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we wanted to talk about, is we want to give you something that you can take home as your homework and get started on that will help you through the whole rest of these pieces of what we're going to be putting together. And part of that is figuring out, which I hope you've done. If you haven't done it yet, go look at, what's the Win with Money video, figure out what your number is, figure out what your monthly number is, like how much do you need to live comfortably each month? Not extravagantly, like what will cover you and you'll be taken care of and that you can live comfortably each month. Figure that out, figure out the number that creates that amount of money. And then there's a bunch of other stuff and questions that you can answer. Claudia, are we going to give them the questionnaire?
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Faith, and then you can distribute it.
Okay, so we're going to give you a questionnaire, which is basically all the kind of information that a financial planner would need. So you can start finding that stuff, answering those questions for yourself, so that each of these things that we do, you know what, you see how that's going to fit in with your plan. Okay, we want you to be able to start taking action right away. And right now is not the time to go out and buy that investment or, put money into this or open this or that. Not until we've actually created the plan, what the whole picture is going to look like, what some of those different buckets are, what needs to go into those buckets. That's when you go and, start looking at the products. So we're still in the planning stages. We're still deciding what your house is going to look like. Okay.
Still building the blueprint, exactly.
Yes, we create the blueprint. You don't just run out and start laying brick, or you're going to be in trouble. All right.
Another session is going to be on investments, how to fund the strategy. So it's one thing if you start a 401k or you start a defined benefit or an IRA, Roth IRA, you name it. Then the question is, how are you going to fund it? We'll talk about investment vehicles and just some investment strategies that are proven without having to know anything and everything, or without having to pass the CFA license, if you will, which is Certified Financial Analyst. So we're not expecting you to become someone that's going to know how to analyze every single stock to its bones, but we're going to give you some really proven strategies that you could run with as well. And then we'll bring in a CPA and talk about tax planning and modeling out taxes. So the goal is, if you say, well, I'm open to having a retirement plan at my company, let's help you find out how much should you be putting aside by you knowing your own tax situation, and we'll give you some concrete tools there too. And here's the thing, I'm not one that just wants to do the talking and kind of, have my own agenda. Please post questions in the Facebook group. This should really be also driven by all of you. So if there are specific questions on any one of these topics, or if you say, Faith, I wish we would address this topic that's not up here, feel free to chat us and let us know what it is that you'd like to learn more about.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So thank you so much for that. It's awesome.
You're very welcome.
Just our little intro. Okay. There's lots more to get into. We have a couple questions. I'm happy to ask this question. So someone here is asking whether they should do a 401k or something like that. If there's tax saving strategies to employ for somebody who is self-employed with a business, but they're over the retirement age.
That's a great question. And again, that's always the tricky part, right? So to give a straight answer to something that's a little bit more complex is always hard. So without knowing the exact situation, but when you still have income, when that business is still driving income, there may be retirement products that you can, not products, retirement strategies that you can implement in your business, even if you're over the, now it's actually 72 years where you have to start taking money out of retirement accounts. But it's usually, if you're still working actively in that business or in a company, you may have to start taking money out of other retirement accounts, but you can still contribute to an active one, if that makes sense.
And also there's other products that are not, that can give you tax deductions and tax savings that are not necessarily retirement account products. So for instance, like having an HSA. So as you get older, you're going to expect that you're going to have a lot more medical expenses, right? So if you open an HSA, you can put money into there that you can even take and invest that money in stuff, but you can be paying out any of your medical bills out of that account. And that's already tax deductible. So we'll talk about that as a strategy as well. And I'm pretty sure you can employ that at any age you're at. And as you get older, you're going to want to put more money into there because you'll expect that your health expenses will go up, right? So that's a great way. That's another great kind of tax strategy. So we'll look at some of these kinds of things in upcoming webinars.
Sessions, yeah. But anything like this, please feel free to post in the Facebook group.
Yes,
and love more specific
contact me in the Facebook group as well. All right. Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? You can post it in the chat if you want me to answer it, but otherwise you can save it and think about, you know, as we do a deeper dive into some of these topics on our next webinars, you'll probably have more questions then. And that's the reason I would really like you, I'm going to post this questionnaire. Absolutely, please fill out this questionnaire as much as you already know. If you don't know the answers to these questions, or you don't even understand what some of the questions mean, don't worry about it. Maybe we'll even do a webinar where I'll take you through the questionnaire and I'll explain to you like what those questions are and why they're there. Who knows? We'll see. It depends on what you guys need, okay? But fill out the questionnaire before we get to these next webinars, because then you'll already have a much better idea of what to ask. Okay?
And thank you all for the kind comments in the chat roll. Really appreciate it.
Yes, and so yeah, people are saying great stuff, fantastic, thank you so much, great presentation, thank you. So thank you, Claudia, we really appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate your commitment to do future webinars for us. So everybody, Thursday at 4:30, going forward in the next few weeks, we're gonna have Claudia coming on, and we're gonna do a series of these presentations, okay?
Look forward to seeing everyone next Thursday. Have a great evening.
All right.
Thank you.
You are welcome.